You are listening to the Social Science KLAI-descope. What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Social Science KLAI-descope. And today we're going to be talking about gender and diversity within social sciences. And this is not going to be the only time that this topic comes up. I think there's a lot of perspectives on this type of topic, and although the theme is very, I want to say, consistent, different people have different experiences with regard to that. And so what I mean by that is from an undergraduate level, when Amia and Dom were talking about gender and race within the econ department, let's say at Swarthmore, or even last week when I was talking to Sonya about her experiences in political science as a grad student. I feel like all those things, we all have different experiences when it comes to gender and race and social science. And so this is not the last time you'll hear of it, but I just kind of want to go into it a little bit further. And here is what Sonya and I discussed with regards to the gender and race dynamic within social sciences. Me coming from an econ background and her coming from a political science background. I also have a really big question about kind of diversity within political science. I think when I think social sciences, I know it's very male driven, and in some sense we could say it's also very white driven. And social sciences, I mean, in economics based off of what I've seen. And so I don't know if that kind of carries over to like political science and other disciplines within social sciences. And I definitely want to get your inputs and what you see within the political science sphere.
Yeah, no, diversity is definitely an issue in political science, as it is in many parts of the academy. And a lot of the issues are specific to political science, but a lot of the issues are also just the way universities operate, and a lot of it is connected to kind of these higher level things. So I think within political science, broadly, and these are not specific to political science, but there's issues of representation among faculty, graduate students, and even undergrad. I think undergrad populations tend to be a little bit more diverse, but with grad students, and especially as you move higher in the ranks of faculty, there are fewer and fewer people who come from different marginalized backgrounds. And that's a real issue because I think we all bring our perspectives into the research that we do and the teaching that we do. And any ideas that, research is separate from the researcher, I think is just not true. So by having a more diverse graduate student population, faculty, you're also just being able to diversify your research and cover perspectives that otherwise might be bent towards the dominant ideas and might miss experiences of people who are otherwise marginalized or excluded. And I think in terms of teaching too, it's really important for undergrads to have diverse faculty members and graduate students teaching them. It's really important to see yourself reflected in the classroom, both in terms of who's teaching you and also the curriculum that you see. So who's writing the works that you're reading, who's writing kind of what we consider the canon and the more important works. And I think identity also has a big effect on what we value in the discipline. Mm-hmm. So an example of that, and specifically in political science, is this idea that if you're studying like a specific ethnic group or a racial ethnic group, you're studying something that's very specific and you're doing like me search. And a lot of this is just not applicable to broader political science. So I think that's something that it's like studying Asian American politics or Latinx politics, or even Black politics is considered as narrow. And And I think that's just really a false kind of approach because firstly, like a lot of the insights from these groups can tell us something about power more broadly. It can tell us about how the way politics works more broadly. You know, a lot of the insights aren't specific, but even if they are specific, like these communities are worth studying and engaging with on their own, right? And I think it also creates this idea that like studying other things that are considered more like objective are neutral. So for example, like studying Congress, right? Like we consider that not identity based. But I remember one of my professor once framed the idea of studying Congress as actually when you study Congress, like you're studying like white men, right? Like a lot of Congress is just white men. So we don't frame it in those terms, but that's essentially like what you're doing. But that gets to have this more objective kind of tone. So yeah, I think those are some of the ways that issues of diversity do play out. And that's not to say that like there's this direct link between your identity and the kind of research you do or how you teach. It's a lot more complicated than that. But I do think diversity is one of the many ways in which we can move towards a more inclusive academy. And I think importantly, it's not just about including more people, right? Like if you hire more diverse faculty, include more, or like if you admit more diverse grad students, that's not enough. You also have to change the context to make sure that the climate and the culture of your department and of your university is supportive, is nurturing. So we're not just trying to include people into a context that's white dominated, but we're also trying to make the conditions more accessible to everyone. So I think that's really important, that it's not just about bringing people in, but also just changing the culture fundamentally and changing the policies and the structures fundamentally.
Right. And so, in some sense, I feel like this is a very evolving kind of situation. I mean, from what I see, because there are definitely more instances of speaking about this issue on social media, especially Twitter, and discussions about that on Twitter. And in some sense, within the economics literature, there's more research with regards to dynamics, gender dynamics, either from papers that are being written and submitted to a conference, let's say, or about assessing the pipeline from undergraduate all the way up to all the way up the ranks of academia, let's say, in terms of gender and diversity. Or even recently, actually, I found there was a study that was done on kind of seminar behaviors, and who's kind of asking what type of questions and how are they framed, you know, that kind of dynamic interacted with like gender and diversity as well. And so those are some kind of the cool research that's going on within economics that are kind of addressing these issues. And so within political science, now bringing this back to political science, is there anything that you're seeing that's maybe kind of either starting the discussion or evolving or invoking change in some sense to the way the political science research is being presented, taught, whatever?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that the really exciting things I've seen have been more in terms of people who are actively building community and specifically across institutions. I think that's been really exciting because I remember something that one of my mentors told me is at the end of the day, like your academic community is not limited to your department. A lot of your academic community is across schools. So I've seen a lot of academics ranging from grad students to faculty who are creating communities. So someone started like a casual like grad student network for students of color. They recently came up with a specific name. What was it? I forget. They're on Twitter though, but they have like a specific name, but they've been creating this informal space for students of color to connect across universities. There's also another another community that is specifically for women of color and for students, but also professors. And each month they have maybe some different theme. So sometimes it's about like work-life balance, about maybe finding your purpose, about teaching. And it's kind of like professional development, but also I think creating that community and network is also really key. So, and there's also like initiatives such as People of Color Also Know Stuff, and Women Also Know Stuff, which are two different networks that share the works about race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, as well as highlight scholars who have those identities. And they're a really important source for, like, people might look to them when they're trying to hire or trying to write syllabi, and, they have like databases of scholars. So these are all like pretty organic communities, very intentional, but organic communities that people are just starting from the ground up. And I think those are just really amazing initiatives that are creative about how we share resources and how we build connections between people.
Right. And it's very encouraging to hear that these initiatives are not only starting, and I can only imagine that they'll grow to something even bigger down the line. And so very excited to see those things manifest. And then hopefully with those initiatives growing bigger, there can be more changes, and less instances of maybe less instances of kind of that discomfort when we're talking about diversity and gender, and hopefully reducing some of the very toxic behaviors of whether within seminar, within teaching, usually involving some gender or diversity. So that's very encouraging to hear that. I don't know if you're very comfortable in sharing this, but have there been instances where there have been either microaggressions or things that made you feel very uncomfortable, and how did you kind of work your way through that particular situation?
I remember, like, in my first semester in grad school, I was like at this mini conference thing, and I was like a first year, so pretty like just trying to take everything in. And like a faculty member came up to me and just started chatting with me and like asking me about my first year. And they didn't know anything about me, but they asked me if I was interested in Asian American politics. And at that point, I was like, okay, I am, but also like, I know you asked me that purely because of how I look.
Hmm.
It wasn't like he knew anything about me. He just kind of made the assumption.
Right.
So I was like, okay, it's right, but also like I think that assumption is really problematic because it suggests that I'm only here because I want to do research about like quote unquote my own community. And he doesn't really see me as someone who could do political science research at a so-called bigger level, even though I think studying Asian Americans is really important. So anyway, I think sometimes I look back and there's this kind of instinct to be like, oh, that was like something really small, like don't take it too seriously. But I think I also have to take a step back and think like, why do I diminish that incident? Like I don't think people go up to like some of my colleagues who might be white or male or white men and kind of make assumptions about what they want to study. I think they're usually granted that flexibility that
Hmm.
they kind of belong and can study what they want. So yeah, no, I think in responding to that, something that's, I always come back to this idea of community and finding professors here and other graduate students here who really share my values, and in a way where we're like all doing our respective research and we're all supporting each other, but we're also interested in thinking through how we change the discipline and how we move forward
Hmm.
and not reinforce some of these toxic structures or cultures.
Right.
And it's been really refreshing to find that group of community. And it also took me a while to find them. I think my first year I was trying to figure out who my people were per se, and it took me like my first to second year to really figure out who that community was.
Right. And so yeah, that's definitely something tough to deal with. I also sometimes think back to the times when, like I always forgive them as like it being, oh, like I know you didn't mean it in, some way of some microaggression, but it's definitely something that I reflect on a lot, and thank you for sharing that story. I think personally it's very important to share these things because a lot of things are kind of, at least for me, kept inside me, and I don't really want to talk about it or share it, or I didn't think it was a big deal. But
Mhm.
talking through it, it helps me realize like, oh, this is a bigger issue that might seem small for a personal perspective, but like the more you add these stories,
Mhm.
they contribute to like a bigger issue that needs to be addressed. And so, um, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's a really good point. I agree. Like we have that instinct to minimize, but really the accumulation of these stories really show a bigger picture.
right. Anyways, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on gender and diversity within political science. I think I have a better understanding now of kind of that landscape, and slowly starting to paint the pictures across the different social science disciplines.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Again, like a lot of these issues they exist in multiple disciplines too. They're not specific,
Right.
but hopefully we're all sort of moving forward and trying to be creative about how we do so. And I mean, change is hard, right? Like it takes a long time and is gradual, which can be difficult. It can make you cynical or burn out. But yeah, I think I like the question that I like your question about, what are the active changes that are happening? Because I think that keeps us focused on the efforts that are occurring.
Definitely. Once again, thank you to Sonya Chen for sharing her experiences about gender and diversity within political science. It's definitely not easy bringing up personal experiences, especially the ones like she mentioned that we kind of either brush off or internalize and never really express. You could also probably tell from maybe some discomfort in my voice that these topics are really hard to talk about. Um, I personally usually keep these topics to myself and never really express them. And so while I do think about them a lot, I don't ever verbalize or tell anyone, which probably contributes to some of the discomfort or in my voice. So hopefully in future episodes, I could be more comfortable about better expressing myself in terms of when we're talking about gender and race in social sciences. But also, I hope that the collection of experiences that are being shared can help not only contribute to speaking out despite being maybe uncomfortable about it, and that those experiences could also lead to some change. So that's all I wanted to say for that. Before I end the episode, I actually did come across an interesting piece of research, um, and it does pertain to today's topic. I also did mention it in my conversation with Sonya, but never really got into it. And so I kind of want to highlight that a little bit more today because it's definitely an interesting piece of research, and it's just kind of a really good paper in terms of quantitatively spelling out some things that have, in my opinion, have been plaguing part of the discipline. And so the paper is called Gender and the Dynamics of Economic Seminars. And it's a paper by Pascaline Dupas, Alicia Sasser Modestino, Muriel Niederli, Justin Wolfers, and the Seminar Dynamics Collective. And it's an NBER working paper number 28494. Sorry to the authors' names I've butchered. If you're listening, let me know how they're pronounced and I'll do better next time. But anyways, the general onset of this paper is exploring the question quantitatively: are economic seminars gender neutral? And another way of saying that is, are males and non-males being treated similarly within economic seminars? My first gut reaction when thinking about that question is obviously no. Just from personal experiences of being in economic seminars during my time at research. Um, but I never found any kind of quantitative way to express that, and so that's why I find this paper so fascinating. Um, and so what they find is that there are significant differences on how male and female economists are treated when presenting their work in quite similar economic seminars. And so within a seminar series, women presenters are asked 3.3 additional questions compared to male presenters. Although research presentations given by women attract larger and more diverse audiences, the larger number of questions asked appears to be driven by men asking more questions. They also find that women receive a greater number of suggestions and clarifying questions, as well as questions rated as patronizing or hostile. And so that's just from like an general economics seminar standpoint. They also include some job market talks as well, and they find more or less the same thing there. I personally find the data that they collect to be particularly fascinating, and so I think it seems like they asked grad volunteers, to attend the seminars and collect the microdata on time, duration, type, and tenure of each interaction, include the gender and seniority of those making the interjections, as well as gender and attributes of the presenter. When it comes to assessing the type of question, they first identify the type of question, so comment, clarification, criticism, suggestion, follow-up, and the tone of the question. So is it supportive, patronizing, disruptive, demeaning, hostile? And they do this for 462 economics talks, which includes junior faculty recruitment seminars across the leading economics departments, for the time period of winter, spring, and summer of 2019. And so this is a very interesting piece of data set because it's being hand collected, and hard coded, and on top of the fact that it's not something you can just basically find on the internet. So it's very unique. I personally think that these studies are very useful because of the quantitative nature of it. For me, at least, when I attend econ seminars, when I was in research, there were a lot of things that I thought about in terms of how questions were being framed, how questions were being asked in a variety of seminar situations. But it's just very helpful to have a number and a economic significant impact that you can point to, saying that kind of point these things out. And so really excited to see this work come out, and I don't know where it is in terms of the publication process, but I really just wanted to highlight it because it was really interesting. The data was really unique, and I think it's very important in terms of having some evidence to start the conversation or continue the conversation in terms of making seminars more productive, less toxic, and maybe change the behaviors of the people that are perpetuating those types of questions, those types of behaviors. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that paper. I will also link it in the description of the podcast, so be sure to check it out and be sure to share it. And yeah, that's all I have to say for this episode. As always, thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you enjoy what you hear, follow the podcast on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Be sure to connect with me on my socials on Twitter at KMDLAI or on Instagram at KMLAIII. And if you really enjoyed these episodes and you think that you might know someone that might also enjoy these episodes, be sure to share it with them and get the word out that way. Other than that, can't say this enough. Thank you so much for listening. I hope to see you all next time on the Social Science Kaleidoscope.